You meet a girl you genuinely like, maybe you've been thinking about her for weeks, maybe you see her at school every day, maybe you've talked a few times and convinced yourself that there might be something there, and eventually you start imagining what could happen. You imagine having conversations with her, hanging out together, becoming closer, maybe eventually being in a relationship, and because you've spent so much time thinking about that possibility, it starts to feel almost real. But then reality hits. She doesn't feel the same way. Maybe she tells you directly, maybe she starts giving shorter responses, maybe you realize she likes somebody else, or maybe you never even get an answer. And suddenly you're sitting there wondering what went wrong. You start analyzing everything. Was I too awkward? Was I too quiet? Did I talk too much? Was I not attractive enough? Should I have been more confident? What does that other guy have that I don't? And eventually the question becomes much bigger than her. It becomes, what is wrong with me? And that question is where things can start going downhill, because there's a massive difference between asking, what could I have done differently? And asking, what is fundamentally wrong with me? The first question can help you grow, the second can trap you. If you've ever experienced rejection, you probably understand how easy it is to turn one person's opinion into a judgment about your entire identity. One person doesn't like you, and suddenly you start questioning your appearance, your personality, your confidence, your social skills, and your entire life. You start looking at other people and comparing yourself to them. You see someone who seems more confident, more outgoing, funnier, or more socially successful, and you think, that's why she likes him instead of me. But human attraction doesn't work like a scoreboard. There isn't some universal ranking system where everybody is placed from most desirable to least desirable, and understanding that is one of the first things you need to learn. Imagine that you meet someone new, they're perfectly nice, they're respectful, they're funny, they're intelligent, they haven't done anything wrong. But for whatever reason, you don't feel particularly interested in becoming close with them. Would you spend hours trying to figure out what's wrong with them? Probably not. You might simply think, they're cool, but I don't really connect with them. That's it. You don't need a dramatic explanation. You don't need a list of flaws. You don't need to prove that they're somehow inferior to you. You just don't feel the connection. Romantic attraction can work the same way. Someone can look at you and genuinely think you're a good person while still not wanting a romantic relationship with you. And this is one of the hardest concepts to accept, because we naturally want cause and effect. We want to believe that if we can identify the problem, we can fix it. If you're bad at math, you can study. If you're bad at basketball, you can practice. If you're bad at editing, you can learn. So your brain thinks, if someone doesn't like me, there must be something wrong with me that I need to fix. But attraction isn't a test. There isn't always a missing skill. Sometimes two people simply don't click, and that can happen even when both people are great. Think about some of the people you admire. There are probably celebrities, athletes, creators, musicians, or just people around you who seem incredibly confident and successful. Yet even those people aren't universally liked. There will always be someone who doesn't find them interesting, attractive, funny, or relatable. If someone who seems to have everything can still be rejected, then rejection clearly cannot be proof that you're fundamentally inadequate. There's something else that makes rejection hurt so much more than it needs to, and that's the story you create in your head. Sometimes you aren't actually attached to the person. You're attached to the story you've created about them. Maybe you've talked to her 3 times, maybe you've never hung out alone. Maybe you barely know what she actually thinks about most things, but your brain has already created an entire future. You imagine walking through school together. You imagine texting every night. You imagine introducing her to your friends. You imagine sitting next to her. You imagine birthdays, trips, conversations, inside jokes, and all these moments that haven't happened. And the weird part is that your brain can become emotionally attached to something that doesn't even exist yet. You create an imagined version of the person. You don't just like who they actually are. You like who you imagine they could be in your life. And when reality doesn't match the fantasy, it hurts. This is why sometimes the person you were obsessed with can suddenly seem much less important months later. You didn't necessarily discover that they became a worse person. You simply stopped feeding the fantasy. You stopped imagining the future and started seeing the situation for what it actually was. And that can be one of the most important realizations you ever have about having a crush. Sometimes you don't miss the person as much as you miss the possibility of what you thought could happen. Another one of the worst things you can do after rejection is compare yourself to whoever she likes instead. You see another guy talking to her and immediately start analyzing him. Maybe he's taller, maybe he's more outgoing, maybe he's more confident, maybe he's funnier, maybe he has more friends, maybe he's better at sports, maybe he's more popular. And then your brain creates a conclusion. He has something I don't have, but you don't actually know that. You are comparing your entire life to a tiny snapshot of another person. You don't know what he's insecure about. You don't know what problems he has. You don't know what his friendships are like. You don't know what he's dealing with privately. You don't even know whether she likes him for the reasons you're imagining. And most importantly, you don't need to beat him. This isn't a competition. If she likes someone else, you don't need to become better than him. You need to respect her choice and continue living your own life, because the moment you turn attraction into a competition, you make yourself miserable. You start treating every interaction like a ranking system. Why does she laugh at his jokes? Why does she talk to him more? Why does she look at him? Why doesn't she treat me that way? And eventually, you aren't even enjoying your own life anymore. You're watching somebody else's. There's another trap people fall into when they really want someone to like them, and that's performing. They think they need to become a completely different person. Maybe they're naturally quiet, but they think they need to act extremely confident. Maybe they don't care about certain hobbies, but they pretend to like them because the person they're interested in likes them. Maybe they normally talk naturally, but around their crush, every sentence becomes calculated. What should I say? Should I respond immediately? Should I wait? Was that message too long? Did that emoji make me look weird? Suddenly having a normal conversation feels like taking an exam. But you cannot build a healthy connection while constantly pretending to be someone else. Eventually, the performance becomes exhausting. And even if someone does become interested in that version of you, you now have another problem. You have to maintain the character. That's why genuine confidence isn't about convincing everyone that you're impressive. It's about being comfortable enough with yourself that you don't need to constantly perform. You can still improve your social skills. You can become better at conversation. You can become more confident. But there's a difference between developing yourself and constructing a fake personality. Now, let's be fair. Sometimes there are things you could have handled better. Maybe you were too nervous. Maybe you didn't communicate clearly. Maybe you talked over someone. Maybe you were too focused on getting their attention. Maybe you didn't respect their boundaries. Maybe you came across as desperate because you were extremely focused on whether they liked you. Those are things worth learning from, but learning from mistakes doesn't mean destroying yourself over them. Imagine you play a difficult game and lose because you made 3 mistakes. You don't usually say, I am a failure as a human being. You say, okay, I know what I need to work on. Social situations deserve the same mindset. If you realize you handled something poorly, learn from it, become better, then move forward. You don't have to turn one awkward interaction into a permanent identity. You are the awkward guy because you had one awkward conversation. You aren't unlikable because one person rejected you. You're a person who is learning, and everybody is learning. There's another reason rejection can feel so powerful, and that's validation. Sometimes what you want isn't actually the relationship. You want the validation. You want proof that you're desirable. You want proof that someone thinks you're interesting. You want proof that you're attractive enough. You want proof that you're worth choosing. And when you don't get that proof, it feels like you failed. But imagine what happens if you get into a relationship for that reason. You finally get the attention you've been craving. You feel amazing. But now you're terrified of losing it. Every delayed message becomes stressful. Every disagreement becomes a threat. Every time they talk to someone else, you start wondering if you're being replaced, because your confidence wasn't built internally. It was borrowed from someone else's attention. That's why learning to be okay without romantic validation is so important. You can still want a relationship. You can still have a crush. You can still hope someone likes you. But your entire identity shouldn't depend on the answer. Sometimes people also turn getting someone's attention into a personal mission. They think about them constantly. They plan every interaction. They change their schedule around them. They analyze their social media. They constantly look for signs, and without realizing it, they've made one person the center of their world. But here's the problem: she has her own life. She has her own problems, her own friends, her own goals, her own interests, and her own feelings. And you have yours. The healthiest approach isn't to make someone your mission. It's to let them be a person. Talk to them. Get to know them, see whether there's mutual interest, and if there isn't, accept it. That isn't weakness, that's emotional maturity. A lot of people get stuck because they only focus on what they're doing. They're constantly thinking, what can I say? What should I text? How do I make her like me? But a much better question is she actually interested in getting to know me too? Because relationships aren't supposed to be one person doing all the work. If you're always initiating conversations, always trying to keep the interaction alive, always searching for reasons to talk, and constantly wondering whether they care, that tells you something. You shouldn't have to drag a connection forward by yourself. Mutual interest usually involves mutual effort. That doesn't mean everything has to be perfectly equal every second, but there should be some reciprocity. You shouldn't constantly feel like you're trying to convince someone to care. And if you're in a situation where you're doing everything and getting almost nothing back, the answer isn't necessarily to try harder. Sometimes the answer is to step back. When someone doesn't give you the attention you want, your instinct may be to increase your effort. If one message doesn't work, send another. If they don't respond, find another reason to talk. If they seem distant, try even harder to impress them. But think about how strange that would feel in almost any other situation. If someone doesn't want something from you, repeatedly following them around and explaining why they should change their mind isn't going to create genuine interest. Human relationships aren't sales pitches. You can't persuade someone into having feelings. You can be kind, you can be interesting, you can communicate. You can show genuine interest, but ultimately the other person gets to decide how they feel, and respecting that is important. Sometimes the biggest change happens when you stop making someone else's attention the goal. You stop checking whether they viewed your message. You stop wondering why they didn't respond. You stop comparing yourself to the people they talk to. You stop trying to manufacture opportunities to see them, and you start doing your own thing again. You go back to your hobbies. You spend time with friends. You work on your goals. You learn something. You create something. You study, you work on your projects, you live, and slowly the person who occupied your thoughts all day becomes just another person. Not because they became less valuable, but because your world became bigger. That's an important lesson. Sometimes you don't need to get over someone by forcing yourself to stop caring. You get over them by giving yourself more things to care about. Imagine two different people. The first person has almost nothing going on outside of their crush. They don't have many hobbies. They don't have many goals. They spend most of their free time thinking about whether this person likes them. So when the crush doesn't work out, their entire emotional world collapses. Now imagine someone who has friends, hobbies, goals, school, projects, interests, and things they're excited about. They still have a crush, they still get disappointed if it doesn't work out, but their entire life doesn't collapse. That's the difference. You don't need to stop wanting relationships. You need to build a life that isn't dependent on one. And this is where self-improvement becomes much more meaningful. Don't improve yourself because you believe you're currently unworthy of love. Improve yourself because you have potential. Learn how to communicate because communication is useful. Become healthier because taking care of yourself matters. Develop confidence because confidence makes life easier. Build skills because skills create opportunities. Make friends because human connection matters. Work toward goals because your future matters, not because you hope one specific person notices. Sometimes you also need to ask yourself why you're so focused on this particular person. Not because there's anything wrong with liking her, but because sometimes we become attached to people who represent something bigger. Maybe she represents popularity. Maybe she represents acceptance. Maybe you think being with her would prove something about yourself. Maybe you think other people would respect you more. Maybe you think finally being chosen would make you feel confident. And if that's the case, getting the relationship wouldn't necessarily solve the deeper problem, because you would still need to feel valuable afterward. That's why it's worth asking yourself, if she liked me tomorrow, what would I believe about myself that I don't believe today? If the answer is something like, I'd finally feel good enough, then that's something worth thinking about. Because another person's attraction shouldn't have to become the evidence that you're worthy. Here's another important thing to understand. You don't need everyone. You don't even need most people to like you. You need genuine connections with people who actually fit into your life. Think about friendship. Would you rather have 50 people who barely care about you or a few friends who genuinely enjoy being around you? Usually, the quality matters more than the number. Relationships work similarly. The goal isn't to become universally attractive. The goal is to eventually meet people where the interest is mutual, where you like them, they like you, you enjoy talking to each other, you respect each other, and you feel comfortable around each other. Nobody has to constantly prove their worth. Nobody has to chase. Nobody has to manipulate. Nobody has to pretend. That's a much healthier goal than trying to make one specific person change their mind. Sometimes the healthiest thing you can do is allow someone to not like you. Don't fight it. Don't argue with it. Don't try to prove them wrong. Don't spend months trying to change their opinion. Let them have their preference and let yourself move on, because there is something incredibly freeing about realizing that not everyone has to understand you. Not everyone has to choose you. Not everyone has to think you're attractive. Not everyone has to find you funny. Not everyone has to want to be your friend, and that's okay. You can still respect yourself. Think back to a time when you wanted something incredibly badly and didn't get it. Maybe it was a friendship. Maybe it was an opportunity. Maybe someone you admired didn't think the same way about you. At the time, it probably felt huge. Maybe you thought about it constantly, but eventually life continued. You laughed again, you found new interests, you met new people, you had experiences you couldn't have predicted. And that's what happens with most things. Your current emotions feel permanent because you're experiencing them right now. But emotions change, situations change, people change, your understanding of yourself changes. The version of you watching this video today isn't going to be exactly the same person a few years from now. You will meet people you haven't met yet. You will experience things you can't currently imagine. And some of the things you're obsessing over today may eventually become memories you barely think about. So if you're currently watching this because there's a girl you really like and she doesn't feel the same way, don't let that become the story you tell yourself about who you are. Don't say nobody will ever like me. Don't say I'm not good enough. Don't say there's something wrong with me. Instead say she didn't feel the same way. That's it. It's disappointing. It might hurt, but it's not the end of your story. Take what you can learn from it. Keep improving. Keep meeting people. Keep building your life. Keep becoming more comfortable with who you are. And eventually, you'll realize that the goal was never to make everyone like you. The goal was to become someone who doesn't need everyone to. Because when you stop desperately trying to be chosen, you stop living for other people's approval. And when you stop living for other people's approval, you finally have the freedom to build a life that actually belongs to you. So the next time you find yourself asking, why doesn't she like me? Pause, take a breath, and instead ask, what can I learn from this and what kind of person do I want to become next? That question can change everything. Because rejection isn't proof that you're not enough. Sometimes it's simply proof that the connection wasn't mutual. And there is nothing shameful about that. You don't have to chase someone into choosing you. You don't have to become someone you're not. You don't have to spend your life trying to prove your worth. Build yourself, build your life, build your confidence, build genuine connections, and let the people who genuinely want to be part of that life come into it naturally. The right connections won't require you to destroy yourself just to earn them. And until then, keep going. Your story is much bigger than one person who didn't choose you. At the end of the day, you don't need to convince someone to like you, and you definitely don't need their approval to know your worth. If she doesn't feel the same way, accept it, learn from it, and keep moving forward. Focus on becoming someone you're proud of, build a life you actually enjoy, and let the right people come naturally. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.